Welcome to Break Away from the Rat Race, a podcast series to awaken your entrepreneurial spirit and help you achieve financial freedom. On our show, you'll learn about investments and how to create passive income. Let's get started with your host, Eric Martel.
Hi, this is Eric Martel, and welcome back to the show. And today I have Hans Struzyna, who is a realtor partner at the Gunderman Group. It's a real estate realtor group that is basically very successful in selling about $180 million in real estate. Hans is also a real estate investor, and he's the host of Another Way to Play podcast. Welcome to the show, Hans. How are you doing?
Eric, man, thanks for having me on. I'm honored, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So really excited to have this conversation with you and see what we get into today.
Yeah, thank you. So I really like your show and your format, Another Way to Play, your podcast. And what I like about it is that you're really focusing on kind of this, I would say, the soft aspect, not necessarily the numbers, not the calculation, all of that, but really about the mindset and the motivation that are needed to basically kind of break away and find another way to achieve financial freedom. So that's what I really like about your podcast.
100%, man. That's it really starts internally. You know, you can learn all the calculations and the numbers and the IRR and, you know, cap rates and all this stuff. But like, until you can really internalize it for yourself and find out what you're trying to accomplish with those calculations and numbers, it's all for nothing.
Yeah. And it takes a little bit of courage and guts. And I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit later when we talk about your father. And because it takes some courage to actually go and do the jump and then say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to do something that's very few people are doing. And then, so yeah, we're going to get into that. So the whole idea here is to achieve financial freedom. So what does financial freedom mean to you?
Well, maybe I can answer that with the tagline that I start every podcast on my show with, which is, if you trade hours for dollars, you'll never achieve financial freedom. And to me, what that means is leveraging not only money, but time and your location so that you can live a life of abundance, both financially, so you have money to do the things you want to do, see the places you want to see, but also the time and the ability to leave your home, leave your desk, and go and actually experience those things. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, you can have $1 million a year, you can have a portfolio of real estate or, you know, stocks or be making a ton of money at a desk. But if you're stuck in one place and you have to be at that desk for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, there's no way you're going to go to Thailand or you're going to go to Asia or you're going to go to Europe or whatever and experience all these cool things. Like, it can't happen.
Yeah. And I think it's a good segue maybe into your father. You mind sharing a little bit about, I think you spent an hour with him on your show talking about his experience, and would you mind sharing a little bit about kind of, his experience and also kind of like how it influenced your career and your own path?
Totally. Well, yeah. As you mentioned, I had my dad on. I think he was episode 3 or 4 on my podcast. But yeah, he is a real estate attorney, which, you know, typically I think that would represent someone who sits behind a desk and is stuck there all the time. So it's funny that you talk about that, but he started early in his career. He did well in law school, went to the top law school, graduated near the top of the class, got a great job out of it. Mm-hmm. And then got into the real world and started representing clients, and specifically people who had real estate holdings. And he recognized that he was at the desk working really hard to keep these people's, you know, investments in line and help them make new investments while they were anywhere in the world, you know, enjoying the fruits of that labor. And he said, you know, man, I got to figure this out. I got to get something else going. So long story short, and if you want to hear the whole thing, go check out that podcast. But he started basically becoming an in-house counsel for hire, which was his first step, and then ultimately started representing some of these clients on sort of a as needed basis, as opposed to having like a full-time attorney on staff. So he had a little bit more freedom, a little more flexibility, and ultimately then took that and started investing himself into various real estate deals. And then he's also had the some of the foresight to forego a fee in some cases and actually take equity in certain deals that he has then turned into a big chunk of his retirement plan. And then from that, he's taken his practice to a very digital platform and actually started Washington State's first virtual law firm, which he and the other one, his partner, are the two general partners of. And they literally don't have any overhead except for bookkeeping. And he can literally go to Portugal, which he and his wife spend 3-4 months a year of, and work and service clients from there, because he has set up this virtual platform to practice the law from.
Yeah, so that's and a couple of things that I thought was pretty interesting is that when he basically said, now that I've arrived, like he was at the big law firm and he got everything he wanted. Now that I've arrived, I don't like where I am. Kind of thing. I thought it was very funny, and this is something too that I found when I was an actuary before, an associate actuary, and then when I got to that position and basically achieved where I wanted to go, I mean, I didn't like what I was doing. It was basically winding down a defined benefit pension plan every day, and then removing or affecting people's retirement benefits. I didn't like that. So how did your father influence you in any way into kind of like what you're doing and how you're seeing financial freedom and how you're seeing work and the career that you've chosen?
Well, when I was young, actually, from the time I was young, and he still says this, he basically has drilled into me in one way or another to be an entrepreneur, or more specifically, be my own boss. That was the way he worded it all the time. And he said, working for yourself is really the only way to be truly free. Because if you're working for somebody else, you are tied to their schedule and tied to their pay structure and that sort of thing. So, and he often referenced real estate as a vehicle to do that, as opposed to, starting a company or something like that. But that was constantly something that was in my head. And as a concept from a young age, that was something that I turned into a couple of small businesses just in my neighborhood, washing cars and power washing people's driveways and houses, and doing yard work here and there. And then ultimately took that into like an auto detailing service that I did at a health club that they owned for a short time, and just took those into some other entrepreneurial ventures that basically were my schedule. I had to kind of bring all the materials and all the stuff and the advertising and collect the money and all that stuff and figure it all out. And it was a huge influence on me, because it set sort of a baseline expectation of the way to pursue wealth and freedom.
So what did your friends, or did you have any, how were you viewed by your friends at the time? You had that, you're a young person, and then so your friends are studying or whatever, and they're playing, and then here you are, you're doing auto detailing during the evening and afternoon and weekends and stuff like that.
I don't want to make that sound like I was some mogul per se, but I was, I would do some of this stuff like in the summer or on the after school or on the weekends, because I was a big athlete. So I was constantly in sports pretty much every, afternoon after school in some capacity. But when I was doing it, it was something that I just did. I didn't really think it was that bizarre. And I don't know that I eventually pulled one or two of my friends into it here and there, but it wasn't something that I remember catching any flack for,
Yeah.
partially because it wasn't ever like a full-time thing for me, and partially because it just, I guess it never came up in conversation, I think.
Yeah. How about the school? Did that influence you, help you? Did you have any teachers that were kind of a good or bad
Well,
influence on you?
I have one teacher that I can remember specifically. So in 7th grade was our English teacher, and me and a couple of my friends were really into cars, specifically like supercars,
Yeah.
Ferraris and Porsches and, Lamborghini and whatever other things 12 or 13-year-old boys are into.
Yeah.
And we were constantly sort of talking about them in class, and, of course, other kids had an issue with and would say things about. And she said one time, like, stop paying attention to those cars because you're never going to be able to afford those.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of stuck in my head as like, I'm going to prove her wrong and be at a point where I can't afford that. And, there's a couple of chips that got placed on my shoulder throughout various points in school and sports experiences that drove me in some pretty big ways. But that was one that I remember very distinctly. And, I suppose I could go buy, some absurdly expensive car right now if I wanted to, but I have chosen to invest in real estate instead.
Yeah.
So rather than
Wise move.
rather than buy a Porsche or whatever, I have bought a couple of dilapidated multi-unit buildings in Tacoma, Washington.
Yeah. I had I have a similar kind of experience. Like people would tell me, listen, at the time I wanted to have like a Range Rover. And then I was inquiring like, how much is it? And said, well, if you're asking for the price, then you can't afford it. It's like, like, what kind of answer is that?
Yeah, right.
And now I don't want it. But yeah, so that's it's pretty interesting. Any particular like a subject at school that you were like particularly that was something that you really liked? And
I was really big into history.
oh, yeah.
For whatever reason, I was always I was watching the History Channel. I was reading books about history. I just sort of devoured it, and for whatever reason, it came easily to me, especially American history, but almost anything history related I was really into. And then math, like once we got into like graphs and, fractions and percentages and, time value of money, like that stuff in history really, in math really started, because I could see how I could apply this to, business or my life in some way. But other than that, like, I was a good student. I was able to figure out how to study and how to get good grades in high school. And then I struggled a little bit in college, but then sort of figured that game out and was able to catch back up a little bit. Once I found my groove, and, I was able to be a pretty decent or good student, depending on who you asked, and had certain subjects that really fascinated me. And those were the ones in high school. But there was one in college, this one professor who talked about, it was a communications class, not my major, just one that I was taking. And to this day, I don't know his name. I don't really remember. I remember this one lecture he gave because someone raised their hand and said something like, "Oh, that's so random. What is that?" And that was like a thing that people would say all the time. And he stopped the lecture and totally took a left pivot on what he was talking about for the day, and spent the next like 45 minutes discussing the concept of random and how nothing is random and everything is on purpose and everything was built by a person to be a certain way. Wow. He's like, the chair was designed by somebody, this blackboard was designed by, and we just went real deep on that concept. And that was like, for whatever reason, of all the classes I sat through in college, like that one really made an impression on me. And it made me recognize like, yeah, there was a design behind everything, and somebody made it that way or wanted it to be that way.
Yeah. You were also very good in the rowing. I think were you part of the Olympic rowing team?
I was in 2016.
Wow.
I mentioned I was always in sports, and I eventually found the sport of rowing.
Mm-hmm.
And from, let's see, I started that when I was 14. And then that took me on a 12-year career that culminated in
Wow.
the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro in 2016.
Wow. So that was, I mean, that's quite it's quite demanding. I mean, the training, and I mean, it's one thing to be training for the high school team. It's another thing when you're actually going to the Olympic and getting there. I mean, I'm sure it must be extremely demanding on so how were you able to juggle all of that? Your
Well,
school.
I mentioned like I was a decent student or good student depending on who you
Yeah.
asked. You know, if you if you put it in the context of as a student athlete, I was a pretty good student. But
Mm-hmm.
as you know, compared to like kids getting 4.0s, that was not me by
Mm-hmm.
any means. But I was definitely someone who was passionate and doing my very best to be the best rower I could be.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the nice thing about a D1 program like the University of Washington where I went is there is support in tutoring and in selecting your class schedules and stuff like that to help you stay on track and help you
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you're able to balance everything. But ultimately, it's just you have to learn time management. You know,
Yeah.
just like anything, like you want to take on multiple things at once. You have to learn how to prioritize, schedule out, time block, and work a little harder, or maybe on the weekends or whatever, in order to achieve both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's quite important, and that's a very important skill to learn. And I think especially I think especially people that they currently have a full-time job and now they know they need to do a transition. They want to trade. They don't want to trade the hours for dollars anymore. They want to
Mm-hmm.
go and start a business and do real estate investment and all of that. But then they have a full-time job and then they don't know this is too much now. They have to basically come up and then organize their time and manage their time so that they can do their full-time job. They can also do their real estate investment and all of that. And
Yeah.
I think you learn at a very young age how to do all of that, how to manage that time. Do you think that helped you? That was a critical skill for you to do what you're doing right now?
Absolutely. And to go a little more macro, like after college, I started doing a lot more personal development and reading and listening to podcasts and just getting exposed to a lot more concepts. And the one that I have maybe had the hardest time understanding in the beginning was the concept of time and
Mm-hmm.
how time is our number one asset. And it is without a doubt the most precious resource that you have. So to say that, which is funny, like to say you don't have enough time is completely ridiculous because everybody has this exact same amount of time on a
Yeah.
one-on-one basis, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you and I each have 24 hours in a day to do what we do, and minus however much we sleep and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, you can have absolutely leverage time, like what we're doing right now. Like you and I both have brands and we have, you know, messages to get out there. We're recording this once, but it's going to go out there and it's going to leverage itself into other people so that we don't have to rehab this conversation in front of every single person who potentially listens to it. You know, same thing with, you know, how you choose to spend your time outside of your 9 to 5 job. Like it is not appropriate for everybody just to wholesale quit and go start a venture, whether it's real estate or something else, because they've got obligations. They've got, you know, mouths to feed. They've got their mortgage to pay or whatever. You know, you have to, you know, do something on the side just in the beginning to get it started sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you know, you have to take an audit of what it is that you're doing every day and how you're spending your time. Because I mean, the easy low hanging fruit is TV. Like I haven't had a TV since 2015 when I moved in with my now wife. She didn't have a TV. I thought I was going to miss it. I stopped watching TV. I don't watch TV anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all have our iPads and, you know, phones and stuff anyways, but like taking that time in like reading a book or going and analyzing some real estate deals, like that realization after I got out of college, and then, you know, obviously having the reps of time management in college and juggling everything really helped me sort of take that leap into the real estate investing world once I was actually ready.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's it requires some sacrifice. Obviously, it's a lot easier to just kind of sit there or go and have a drink with friends all the time, or for dinner and stuff like that. It takes some discipline. It's especially hard if you have kids at home. Then you have to figure out a way to spend time with the kids and then also work and do your other endeavors and stuff like that. But you have to think also that you're doing that for your kids as well. For me, it was also about leaving a legacy for my children and grandchildren. So that was my motivation, for doing that, spending that extra time and stuff like that. And so for you, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, I don't have kids, admittedly, so I'm maybe not the best expert on this, but
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like when I watched my dad do his work, like, I wasn't involved with him doing whatever he was doing, but I
Mm-hmm.
knew he was doing stuff. And then I would go into his office and I would see various books. I remember one in particular, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which almost every real estate person is
Yeah.
in the entire world has read, and not having any clue what it was about. But I knew he was in there reading stuff. I knew he was doing stuff. And if he would have brought me into some of those maybe earlier, I may have had a different appreciation for self-education and bill paying, and like including your kids in some of these educational or even mundane processes. I don't think is inappropriate. And I think in retrospect, if he would have pulled me into the office once in a while and been like, this is what our electric bill costs. This is how you write a check. This is how much money we spend on this and that. Or it's like real estate. Like, we're going to buy this property and it's going to cost this much. We're going to have to pay this much, but it'll rent for this much. And like having some of those basic conversations at an early age, like talk about an education, man. Like, you're going to tee those kids up to just crush it when they get out of high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's very important to be frank and honest about money. I mean, I think there's kind of not necessarily a stigma, but it's kind of a cloud around the money discussion with your children for some reason, and I think that's very important to open that up and then really share with them how that works, how money works in a day-to-day basis, and that you get so much in, you want to make sure that you don't get everything out.
Right.
So I think that's a good conversation.
I remember when I started getting an allowance, I was like, the one condition, well, other than doing the chores, the one condition of allowance was we had to balance a checkbook. We had a Quicken account, Quicken 99 or whatever version they got us at the time. And we had to, at any point, they could come in and say, open it up, and is it reconciled? And do you know how much is in there? And if the answer was no, we didn't get allowance that week. And if we did, then it was like, okay, here's your week's allowance. And it's funny because I'm not good at I took accounting. I did well in accounting in school. I dislike accounting a lot, actually, personally, and I don't do it, but I do have a really good sort of mental frame of like money coming in, money going out, and can kind of keep track of that in my head to some degree. My wife is substantially better at the spreadsheets than I am, but I think that's because of that exercise they made us do. Like, they made us appreciate money, accounting for it, coming in and out. And that was a huge learning thing that my parents did. And I think that was a really good thing that they did relative to the respect of, counting and keeping track and not overspending and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, we always spend too much time on accounting, I find. I have like somebody that's full-time on that. And I have obviously a CPA that's kind of like does the tax strategy and stuff like that. But I still, even with those two people, I still have spent way too much time on the accounting. So I'm looking at things and why are things. So, but now I'm looking at least more looking at the reports and less at the transactions and then saying, okay, well, what's going on here? What's going on there?
Absolutely.
You have to know what's going on.
Totally. 100%. And if you let that go for too long, you will find that you get smacked pretty good for something. And then you're like, oh, I better come back to it.
So yes, I agree with you that the discussion about money, I think it's is very important. And to me, like, did you have anything like in like at school and stuff like that? What did you study at the University of Washington?
I was a business major. My focus was entrepreneurship.
Okay. So how did that help you? Was that really helpful in helping you in your career and your real estate investor career?
Mm-hmm.
And because you did some flips, I think on the West Coast, you also did
Yep.
some multifamily out of state.
Mm-hmm.
So did that
Well,
help?
my general business, I think, is a great. Just getting a general business degree is a great way to go for people who want to be in some form of business. Obviously having an accounting degree could be very, very useful given depending on what field you want to go into. But for me, University of Washington had a pretty interesting entrepreneurship program. Like most people sort of laugh at it. Like, what is an entrepreneurship focus?
Mm-hmm.
The basis of it was a 2-quarter class. The first quarter is you'd get into groups, you'd form a business, you'd write a business plan, and at the end you would pitch to a board of directors who controlled a bank account for the class that was there in order to make loans to students, so that in the second quarter you would go and execute your business plan. Yeah. And having that experience with other people and trying to make an actual product or service, depending on what you try to do, it was hugely valuable for me. Yeah. Getting out there with little to no risk and just trying something was awesome. And I learned so much from it. And I think that took me from a place of like, oh, you can come up with an idea, you can execute on it, and you can actually make some money. Because we ended up turning a profit and, did pretty well. We beat our projections by a little bit or whatever. I can't remember the numbers, but we did well compared to what we thought we would do. Yeah. And that was just a really cool experience of like going out and actually starting something. So that, of course, led me into other things, real estate related.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a very good program. And studying business and studying entrepreneurship, I think it's very, very different. I mean, if you go and get the business administration degree, you end up kind of like working for somebody. So you're kind of preparing yourself to follow. Totally. And then entrepreneurship, I think you have to have the drive and you have to have the motivation to basically make it happen. Nothing is going to happen if you don't make it happen as an entrepreneur.
Correct. And there's, especially where you and I live here in the Bay Area, there's so many people who, lean on the nostalgia and the beauty of the entrepreneur lifestyle. But, realistically, when you work for yourself, whether you're an investor or you're trying to start a tech company, like you're working probably more hours for less money, especially for the first, couple of years, maybe even the first 10 years, than you would be if you would just went out and worked for somebody else. And so you're taking a pretty serious lifestyle hit that you have to be prepared for. And that's where that, trusting in yourself and that vision and that determination and drive comes into play that, not everybody is frankly cut out for, nor should everybody necessarily pursue, because it's hard. And it's not fun, and it weeds a lot of people out pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. At the beginning, you have to do everything. So you have to be the accountant. You have to be the marketing guy, the sales guy, the product development guy,
the cleaning staff, the guy who fixes the printer, like all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why one of my the favorite book was like 4-Hour Workweek, because that it's really kind of like enlightened a lot of people about, you don't have to do all these jobs. You can hire somebody, virtual assistant, to handle that and handle this and all of that.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was literally just on a phone call with my friend Ashley, who's also been on my podcast. She was one of the early ones, and I'll get you the episode number for your show notes. But she is wholesaling houses in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I were just chatting about the process she's building out. And she basically is like, what I like to do is I like to generate leads and set up appointments. And that is a really crucial part of that flow. If anybody knows anything about real estate investing, especially on the flip wholesale side.
Mm-hmm.
And she is really good at it. And she's like, I find it to be super easy. And I was like, Ashley, that's because that's your superpower. You're really good at that.
Yeah.
And she's like, I was an agent. I really sucked as an agent, or not sucked. I was mediocre as an agent, but I'm really good at this thing. And I don't know why everyone thinks it's so hard. It's like, because you found your thing.
Yeah,
and like, that's just to say that like, if you've got an idea or a skill set, that you don't have to be the person who does everything else. Like, you can go partner with people who are really good at some of the other things, like the construction or the, the financing or whatever it is. And finding a partner who complements the skills that you have or you don't have, and is similarly minded. Like that can be so valuable, or hiring it out in some cases, but finding that partnership, like if you don't have to be that person.
Yeah. And eventually, I mean, you have to mind the business. So, if you constantly kind of involve in the little mechanics of the accounting, or in the, or fixing the printer or something like that, all these little details, I mean, you're not really minding the business. There are other decisions that need to be made. There are other things that you need to drive, and you're the only one who can drive that. So it's really prioritizing what you can do, what you must do, and everything else is, can be delegated to somebody else.
But I also want to honor the fact that, especially when you're getting started and you may or may not be making a lot of money, like making those decisions to hire someone or delegate it out, it's like even a couple $100 to somebody to help you with anything. It's like, it's a serious amount of money and it's a serious decision.
Yeah.
And, if you get to the other side of it where you're actually building, solid revenue streams, and you can afford to pay for some of these things, like going back to our time thing, like that is huge. But taking those first couple of risks on hiring or leveraging out is no small ticket. And I think that that's where sometimes partnerships or mentorships or just friendships come into play, and having people who can help support you in that stuff.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, as we mentioned, so there's a lot of time commitment, involves a lot of sacrifice and all of that. And I think in order to get through this and to stay focused and to continue, because you have to, it's a marathon that you embark on. So you need to stay motivated. So what motivates you, as in your career and in your goals, and to achieve financial freedom?
Well, you alluded to the Olympian title earlier, and for a long time in my life, that's what it was. Like achieving that title, going and rowing in the Olympic Games, and being at the very tippy top of my chosen sport. Like that's what motivated me. And then I crossed the finish line, 4th place in the final, and, just floundered for the next couple of years and really struggled to find it. And that's definitely, you talk to any high level athlete, that descent from that peak performance is not an easy thing. But I over with a lot of help and some coaching and mentoring and, all of the support of friends and family, ended up finding real estate. And I always sort of had a thought I would get into real estate, but never knew how or what that would look like. And, as of now, I'm with, as you mentioned at the intro, with the Gunderman Group, which is the #1 team in the East Bay, which is Oakland and Berkeley and Alameda, some of those areas in the Bay Area. And I am working to become an incredibly successful agent with that team, because it's a high bar that they have set, as well as pursuing my real estate investing to produce financial freedom for me and my wife. And actually today, like right before I got on this call, we just closed on our second property. I just found out.
Yeah.
So now we have 2 properties, 4 units total, and we are rocking and rolling in our little portfolio here.
Uh-huh. So what is this? So I know that you're investing out of state as well,
Yep.
right? So can I ask like which state you're investing and why?
Yeah, Tacoma, Washington is
Okay.
where both of our properties are.
Okay.
The reason is twofold. One, I told you I'm an agent. I started as an agent here locally in the Bay Area. I've become more knowledgeable in this market, and it cannot make financial sense of any of the numbers that I see. I know that people do make sense of it. However they do that, I don't know. Like buying at a 4 cap, I don't know how people do that. Like, or, anyways, we can digress there. But for what I was looking to do with cash flow and long-term holding, it just wasn't going to make sense. So I started looking out at other markets. I looked in Sacramento, we looked at Fresno, we looked all over the place. And then we went out of the state. We looked at Kansas City. We looked at some stuff in the Northeast where she's from. And ultimately we were like, wait a second, why don't we look at a market, like a secondary or tertiary market somewhere around where we travel otherwise? And I have family in Seattle. She has family in the Northeast. And I was like, oh my gosh, Tacoma. Tacoma's getting like 2,000 or more people a month moving there. The housing stock is pretty tired. It's really not nearly as competitive as Seattle. The Seattle area is. It's got a military base about 5 miles south. It's got a port. It's got 2 major colleges, and it's got multiple industries. Tech is slowly moving in there, as well as a lot of blue collar industries. So it's really got a solid renter pool as well as ownership pool. And the rents were all sort of in that $800 to like $1,200. That's like a really nice sweet spot for a vast, like a 2-1 will rent for somewhere in the $800 to $1,200 range. It's pushing up a little bit now, but it's really solidly in there, and the numbers make sense in those numbers. And one of the things I wanted to look for was a market where $800 to $1,200 rents existed and could thrive. And if I could underwrite a deal to have rents in that ballpark and it would still make sense, like I believe that you will not destroy $800 to $1,200 rents, no matter what recession comes, no matter what happens. Is short of like atomic war, I think $800 to $1,200 rents will always be somewhere, because the people who currently are affording that rental amount are probably going to continue to be able to afford somewhere in that ballpark. And people who are in like an A class who are spending, let's just say $2,000 when it gets tight and they get pinched, they're going to come down to somewhere in that ballpark. So you're going to have a conglomeration of people in that price point in the event of a massive recession.
I agree. And this is exactly where I invest as well. But I don't invest in Washington, but in the same kind of category. We invest in C class and B class properties, and the rents is anywhere between $750 to in Cleveland we probably get like $900, $1,100 around that for some properties. But so this is a sweet spot. B class, C class. Stay away from the high crime areas and like the D class kind of neighborhood. But these are, for me, the C class is kind of like the blue collar worker, the hourly worker, and then kind of like the B class is more like the manager, supervisor kind of level. And so they're always going to be there. And then if there's any kind of recession, that's the same feeling that I have, and I think that was proven also by some articles that were written about that. It's basically the luxury in the A class, they're going to come down if there's a recession, but there's really a bottom. And then the people that are in C and B, they're going to stay at the same level. So
absolutely. And
we feel it's good about that.
Totally. And there's a lot of moves into some of those markets. Like Tacoma is just booming compared to what it was, just even 5 years ago. When I grew up in Seattle, you didn't go to Tacoma. It was sketchy. It was not a place you go. Same thing with, I'm sure, some of the neighborhoods that you're investing in. But you're seeing a bit of a resurgence in some of these spaces now, especially with the millennials, my generation, moving out of places like San Francisco. You look at the demographic information, they're generally speaking, the Bay Area people are either going to Fresno or they're Central Valley area, or they're going up to Sacramento. And then from those places, they're going to Oregon, they're going to Idaho, and they're going into Texas. And then from there, who knows where they go.
Yeah.
But there's, interesting demographic and population shifts that are happening in the direction of some of those types of markets. And if you can identify them, obviously, like Austin, Texas, or Dallas, Fort Worth is all over everybody's mind and has been for 5 years. So maybe that one isn't quite the one you focus on, but
I think it's been there, done that kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we're looking for other markets that are not as mature or that about to mature. And this is, that's why we like Cleveland and Memphis, for these reasons. I mean, they're kind of like, they're coming back up in the case of Cleveland. And then Memphis has been kind of like a steady climb for a while. So.
And one thing that, like, the thing that really, the deal that we just closed on today as we're recording this, that really solidified it for me relative to the neighborhood was, obviously I did all this due diligence ahead of time and the numbers worked out. So we went and saw it, but then I drove in on the main street half a block away. There's a brand new Starbucks that got built right.
Funny.
Literally, I could throw a rock and hit the Starbucks and I was like, Starbucks knows a lot more than I do.
Yes,
so I'm going to follow up with them. They just built this building. Like, this is for sure a year old or less. Yeah. And so I think that people kind of are like, well, how the heck do I know if this is good or not? Like, well, look for a Starbucks, look for a Trader Joe's, look for a Walgreens, look for, some of these stores that put in substantial infrastructure, sign long-term leases, and do more research than you and I could ever hope to do. That's a good little hack there for people who are just starting out. Yeah,
that's right. And we had in Midtown Memphis, we have a 20-unit apartment building there. And then, so when we were there last time, they're building a Starbucks a block away from
beautiful
building. Now we know. Now we go from a C class to B class as soon as there's a Starbucks.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We've made it. The other thing too that we follow is kind of like Amazon, kind of like where they're investing, where they're building their distribution center. And then we also kind of with Memphis, FedEx is in Memphis, they're in Cleveland and stuff like that. So FedEx is like a pretty big hub. So the reason why we're following those, because they build a lot of warehouses, they hire a lot of blue collar workers, and then if you hire a lot of blue collar workers, you're going to need managers. So that's really our B and C class kind of where they're going to come from. So completely.
And they move there because of the cost of living and the cost of labor and the cost of taxes and this and that. And some of these companies, believe it or not, give a shit about their employees and their lifestyle. And, they want to find places where these people can afford to live and have a good quality of life. And, even if you make hundreds of thousands of dollars in the Bay Area, you may not be, having a good quality of life. And so if you're looking to invest, like finding these places that are drawing the attention of some of these larger companies or just people in general, as a smaller city, a secondary or tertiary city to something big, it's got, like, for us, it was within a 30-minute drive to the international airport. It's got a port, it's got an army base, it's got schools. For you've got a variety of industries moving in, Amazon, medical, this and that. Whatever your flavor is, like, finding those markers and just following them.
Exactly. Yeah. That's very good. So for you, like for managing these properties in Washington, do you have you have property management in place, and you have how did you, because you have to have like are you buying them like turnkey, or are you buying them so that you rehab them?
And that's another
like a BRRRR strategy, or
that's another big thing. Like you obviously do a lot of turnkey. I am buying to add value to it. So we were fortunate enough to be introduced to a contractor who has been amazing for us. And it's really important if you're going to invest out of state to have strategic partnerships in the local market. So we're coming in and we've sort of built out like a menu of like, let's just do it like the last one. So it's like floors, paint, baseboards, appliances, Formica countertops, new lights, etc. And he gets it done and hands it back to us. And then we actually have decided to work on self-managing. We had a property manager on site, or not on site, but who was taking care of our first property. Long story short is they were spending way too much money on stupid stuff. And so we parted ways with them, and we, at the same time, the tenant that we put into our unit that was coming available right then was actually a handyman on the crew of our contractor who was looking for a place to settle with his two boys. So we ran his background check. We worked out a deal with him that he gets a rent credit every month for basically being our on-site manager. We get him to go over to his or the other unit. We get basically an hour of his time a month or 12 hours a year, whichever comes first. And he gets a rent credit. He goes and fixes the dryer. He unclogs the toilet. He lets the electrician in, whatever the case is, and we don't have to deal with it. And then we save on the property management. He gets a rent discount and everyone's happy.
Oh, that's very good. And you're doing good for him as well. So that's
of course. Yeah.
Overall.
And we're going to pull him in onto the second unit or the second property we just bought, and we're going to give him something similar. We haven't negotiated it yet, but he's going to get something similar. And this next property is only about 5 minutes from the one where he lives. So it's going to be pretty easy for him. And, he's got some trade skills. He's pretty responsible. He's an ex-Marine and, really great guy, and just is trying to get himself established in Tacoma and, raise his kids in a safe, good environment. So, a lot of people think about like, why would someone do this? Like, why would someone live in this house? Like, or why would someone take that deal or buy it or sell it for that price? And I think that goes to maybe a bigger comment that took me a while to realize, but everyone's motivation and life circumstances are totally different. And, we can talk about numbers and dollars and metrics all day and talking about Starbucks and where they're going next. But, it all comes down to people in this business, in any business, but understanding the motivations of people, understanding what a win-win would look like, trying to put something together that everyone can be really happy about, because what is real for you and what is necessary for you is definitely not the same as for the person on the other side of the deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all have like a point of view, a particular point of view, a particular goal that we want to accomplish. And, this is what when I talk to people, or I talk about my business and, why I'm recommending this property in Memphis and stuff like that. So you have to understand that my point of view is passive income, cash flow, and high return. So that's what I'm looking for, and value add, right? So for me, this market here in the Bay Area, that doesn't work for me because, for obvious reasons, too much money. Even after, if you wanted to cash flow, you have to put too much money in, then your return is then
your cash on cash is nothing, or
exactly
negative maybe, or whatever.
Negative, but it works for some people, but yeah, it's just everybody has kind of like a perspective or a point of view or a goal they want to achieve. So yeah, you have to respect that.
And that part is super important, that like reverse engineering, because yeah, like you can always find a better investment. Like you add, like there's always something out there that'll return a half a point more, or, you know, a little bit easier, or this, you know, whatever. But like you ultimately have to decide what your end game is, because real estate is just a vehicle, just like stocks and bonds and all that. That's just a vehicle. Like whatever you like, are you trying to retire on a portfolio of cash flow? That's one thing. Are you trying to make, you know, 15-20% on your capital in a year? That's probably a flip.
Yeah.
You know, it's all just a vehicle of how you get there, and knowing your end goal before you start will help guide you, so that you can be like, hey, Eric, I got, you know, this money, I just want to park it somewhere and I want to earn, you know, 6 or 8% on it, you know, get a little premium on the market. And you're like, great, I got this fantastic turnkey deal out in Memphis. Or, you know, I want to get really serious about this, and, you know, want to, you know, flip houses. Like, okay, maybe you should go in an area where there's really high appreciation. Bay Area is not a bad place for that, but, you know, or if you can find the deal, of course, but, you know, but the point is like finding that end goal in mind, and then marrying the strategy to it.
Exactly. And yeah, and to me, like it's also a circle, because sometimes you kind of, and I know we're getting close to our time here, so I want to, but it's kind of a circle. You kind of do your strategy, and then, okay, well, the strategy and the goal, the investment vehicle that I choose to do that may not be right. So I tweak the strategy, and then eventually, in order for us, you know, before we got into the out-of-state passive income, we did a lot of pivoting here in the Bay Area, and we went to commercial, we went to this, that, and the other thing, and now we finally found an alignment between our goals and then the strategy and the market that we're investing, the type of properties that we're investing and stuff like that. But it took a few years to figure out exactly what the right combination was.
100%. And you outlined that on my podcast, which you should link to if you want to hear more of Eric's story. Go check that one out. And he goes deep on all those pivots, and he did quite a few of them. So
don't give up.
Don't give up. Exactly.
So Hans, thank you very much for a great conversation. I have a lot more that I would like to talk to you about, but we're out of time. And so I just want to give you an opportunity, if you want to share a book that you would recommend, or any kind of a philosophy, or that you live by, that you want to share.
Well, the book, I think if you're early in your real estate adventures and you've really had no exposure, is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I mean, that's the most cliche real estate answer, but there's a reason for that. Because it is really powerful, and it helps redefine this for you. And then beyond that, for real estate investing, it just it depends on what direction you want to go. So message me if you want a better recommendation after you've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Exactly.
And then I think that the philosophy, something that's really turning in my head right now, is what questions are you asking yourself? Like, what quality, like, whenever anybody asks you a question, just something as simple as, you know, what color is your tie? You know, everyone's head immediately goes to like every tie they've seen, what style they've seen on this guy, whatever. And the same thing is true when you ask yourself questions internally, like, why is this happening to me? You're going to go search for that answer. Why did that guy get lucky and I didn't? You're going to search for that answer. So if you can start controlling the questions that are in your head, instead of like, why did I get unlucky? How about, what can I do to make this a better situation? Totally different answer. And that sets you on a complete different trajectory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Changing the question so that it really sets you up on a better, more constructive thinking process. Yeah.
100%.
This is very good. Well, Hans, thank you very much. And I'll put in the comments kind of links to your podcast, Another Way to Play, and also the link to my interview with when you interviewed me, Hans, and we can share some more good stories.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, thank you for having me on the show today. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm always honored to talk to you and to be on your show. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Break Away from the Rat Race with your host, Eric Martel. If you want to share your story and experience with our listeners, please message us on Facebook at Break Away from the Rat Race. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast on iTunes.